Welcome to Command and Control, a podcast series about military command and the control measures used to orchestrate combat engagements and wars. In the last season, we talked a lot about command. I dabbled in control, but took a largely tactical land-centric view of C2. In this season, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the high levels of C2, operational art, the pole-mill interface from both sides, and of course to tip our lances at some of the windmills of contemporary doctrine. I'm delighted to say that the show is once again sponsored by Systematic.
As recent world events have shown, command and control needs to deliver complete situational awareness from the headquarters right down to the tactical edge. Systematic's Cityware suite unites forces across battlefields and enables the flow of plans and orders even within denied or contested environments.
Everyone has a view on the domains of war, 5 or 7, highly differentiated or similar principles. Perhaps we need more time to understand, let alone operate in some of the new ones, but we know enough, have enough experience about the established ones to understand them. And they are different. In a classroom, lecture hall or National Defence College, perhaps there is a temptation to view and focus on the similarities, the broad sweeps of colour that make them generic. Yet when you're in the ground, in the fight, C2 on land, at sea and in the air are very different. My own experience of air command is perhaps best encapsulated during an 8-hour period in a USAF ABCCC, Airborne Command and Control Centre, in the 1990s during the NATO operations in Bosnia. Their aircraft from a host of NATO states were flying recce and deliberate strike missions, amongst other things, into Bosnia. In that aircraft on that mission, 12 people working during a 12-hour flight conducting live real-time command and control of various missions. And during that period, hundreds of aircraft flew in and out of contested airspace, identifying targets and then waiting for clearance to strike. The team on board that jet had the authority to task and approve missions in support of legal mandates, as well as deconflicting flight profiles, retasking aircraft, including drones for emerging situations, communicate with higher and lower commands, keep national authorities in the loop, and maintain a real-time picture of the battle space. Now, I was a naval fighter controller at the time, so I had an understanding of the authorities, the airspace, the processes that put all this together. But seeing them control that 12 hours was genuinely impressive, and so different from the maritime or the land environment. That experience for me in a unit that was executing the ABCCC mission was a lesson in control, but not command. The command, the intent, had been pushed out at least 24 hours before in the Air Operations Directive, the AOD, with the commander's intent on it. But that was the 1990s. Since then, we've had a whole host of air-dominated missions and wars. Not many have been successful in retrospect, despite the Western supremacy in the air. And that has now changed in an era of great power competition and challenge, with war in areas with democratised SAMs and basic but ineffective integrated air and missile defence IAMD networks. According to doctrinal definitions, the West is just now emerging from a period of air supremacy, not just superiority, but an uncontested dominance that determined the way Western forces could and did fight. But those were just my musings, my reflections on something that happened quite a long time ago. I wanted to talk to someone with a more useful experience than that. So I asked Paul Kendall to help me understand contemporary air power command and control. Paul's a former Royal Air Force senior officer with experience in strategic analysis, operational planning, wargaming and air power. He's graduated from professional military education courses in the UK and the US and has commanded aviation units at home and on operation. He's also worked in a series of air command and control headquarters and centres. Now, we recorded this conversation over a couple of drinks last week at a pub on the south coast of the UK. Actually, it was a pub called the White Hart in Soberton, a place with a fine selection of ales, good food and great service. But you will have to excuse some of the background noise. It's sort of fairly typical of a British pub on a Monday night in winter. We'll remove what we can, but you'll still get some of the interference in the back, for which I apologise. I started by asking Paul whether my experience over the Adriatic Sea in 1995 was just a moment in time. Had things changed in the subsequent 20 plus years?
I think, obviously some things change, some things stay the same. I think one of the things about that is that you've seen this idea of centralised control to give you flexibility. And the conventional view of SC2 is that you do this centralized control thing because it means that you can swing your effort wherever you like in the battle space. I mean, we have done that. I remember in the early stages of the Libya operation that we were chasing single source intelligence, and across this 600-mile stretch of coastline, a couple of days, we shifted the air effort from one end of the country to the other in about an hour and a half. And it means you've got the whole air effort there. Same in Afghanistan. When somebody gets shot at and is in a tricky situation, you don't just get the aircraft that's assigned to your unit. You can get the whole Air Force there for your incident for as long as it takes. So that's conventionally the idea of why we do it, because it's very mobile as opposed to sort of land, which is less mobile, more static. My own theory, though, I kind of got this little pet theory it's about battle space. It's about sharing battle space. So if you're in the army, and I would say if you take a soldier and he's drawing a line on a map, he's probably drawing a boundary. Airmen draw routes, soldiers draw boundaries. What I mean by that is if you were to take a division to war, if the 3rd Division went to war, it will have with it a couple of brigades. And actually, in one of those brigades, it's probably got an Estonian company inside a Danish battle group inside a British brigade. So the Estonian commander can draw a line around himself, and that's his battle space. And he can do what he likes in it. Estonian processes, he can have Estonian ammunition, the Estonian radios that Tony talked. As long as he can talk to his battle group commander, he's fine. And as long as the Danish battle group commander can talk to his one-up, it doesn't matter if all his troops speak Danish. If you think about a combined air operation where you might get an airborne from a German airbase, get a refuel from a French tanker, get a NATO AWACS to talk you through a Polish Patriot battery, go off and strike a target with a fighter sweep that's from, say, Denmark, come home, potentially divert to a Czech airfield, and then come back to where you came from. Well, what that means is everybody's got to speak the same language, everybody's got to use the same procedures, there's got to be a single plan. There's no point really saying, okay, tanker squadron, you decide where you're going to put your tankers, because actually it's got to rely on everything else. So I think there's a lot of things that drop out of that, not least how aviators behave towards each other. They kind of naturally want to help each other out and fairly collegiate and cooperative generally.
Let me come back on that, because it's not just that everyone speaks English. That's clear. The set of processes are similar in the air environment, and they are well understood. So whether it's boundaries or routes, whether it's ingress, egress routes, whether it's IFF on and off lines and all the stuff that goes with it, safe altitude, missile envelopes, all these things are known and understood. So there needs to be a set of processes around which everything can operate in a sort of commonality. So in many ways, from what you're saying, and I now recognise what you're saying, there's a standardisation in air operations across Western states that might exist for armies or navies, but doesn't have to be abided by for every single mission, right?
Yeah, so I can remember one of my abiding memories is during the Libya operations, walking into the Kayak in Poggio and Artico, and it had been going about 2 or 3 days, and there was a whole bunch of aviators from all different countries who were on the desk who hadn't known each other before, and it was working. They knew how to do it and work together. So that's in the Air Operations Centre, not the front line, not in the air. In the Air Operations Centre, they all knew how to do it. So that's the strength you have, a standardised process.
Has that evolved in any way? Because everyone talks about the airspace, the dynamic battle evolving, and indeed, battle space management processes we used in the 90s for Bosnia were not the same ones that we had in Afghanistan. The ability to clear off a target so you could have time on target for the F-16s. And actually then in Afghanistan, we were very dynamic. So we were like, okay, so you can fly and drop from this altitude, but at the same time, I'm going to have HIMARS arriving at this altitude. I've got 105s, I've got 155s, and I've got some mortars, and I'm stacking this stuff. But we can all operate in the battle space together. We don't have to be separated. The C2 must have evolved, right, in some ways, or does that central philosophy remain valid?
I think both are correct. Obviously, things have moved on. We're much more connected, and certainly in Afghanistan, that we could use the electromagnetic spectrum however we liked. We didn't really have any threat in the air. You could argue, though, that we were able to do all of that stuff in the Cold War. Actually, it's just a sort of turning the rheostat up and down on how much you can control it. I always think we're kind of stuck with the ATO process. It's quite difficult to change it because everybody knows how to do it. But actually, when you go back to the history of it, I really dislike this showing the donut of death to people and saying this is the ATO side. It was, well, it's 72 hours and how are you going to ever be responsive with that? Well, actually, it was designed to be aligned with the core planning cycle in the Central Front. And actually, it works for that. And it works actually on many, many time cycles. So I don't think the ATO cycle was terrible, and I don't think it's actually what we're stuck with, but it is difficult to change it.
So we should just explain to people who don't understand what the ATO cycle is. The air tasking order runs on a 72-hour plan that tasks all aircraft that are available. Now, they might be on alert or they might be tasked with actual missions that works for their specialist capability. So there might be a penetrating bomber will get one type of target, whereas a close air support aircraft will get another type of target. So you maximise the utility of resources for their specialist roles, but you can also surge them. So just because you're tasked with one thing, it doesn't mean you can't be swung into another, but it does give you, apart from the alert aircraft, does give you definite times when you're going to be available. That's when you're going to plan the mission. And that's so you can do that in concert with other aircraft, which might not be either co-located or they almost certainly won't be from your country, particularly if you want something like suppression of enemy air defence that goes along with you, right? That's the basis of it.
It is, but I think there's kind of a little bit more to that in that one of the things that is not immediately apparent, the air tasking order comes out, it's designed to be sent over telex machines. So it's typed out in this almost impenetrable code. It looks like it's machine readable, but I would contend it isn't, because although you can pass it, a machine can look at it and work out which aircraft go where, there's very little in there about actually what the plan is. So this point about communication of intent, which you alluded to with the Air Operations Directive, that to me is something that's important in all military operations. Communication of intent, when I was out in Afghanistan, just after McChrystal had taken over, and there was a discussion about the McChrystal plan, and I had a reason to go back through the other orders, and actually the orders hadn't really changed. What had changed was that McChrystal had gone out on the ground and communicated his intent in a very lucid way to all the commanders. But actually, the plan was pretty much the same. But of course, that's where you get this mission command from. And mission command in the air component is very different, because actually, you're not going to have a Bridget Remagen moment in the air component. You're going to have a guy who's sent off to bomb one target and sees another target that would be even better, so he bombs that. That's terrible, because it makes the plan fall apart. Because what you don't know when you're going out is what all the other people are doing on the ATO and why they're doing it. Now, you could read through the whole ATO, but you won't, because it's hard to read and it doesn't actually tell you what the intent is. The intent's in the OD. And that's something we found in the work I'm doing now, trying to use artificial intelligence to monitor the ATO execution, that actually you can't always tell what something is on the ATO for. You can tell that the mission is going or isn't going, but you don't necessarily know what the knock-on effect is.
So I get that. So we get the ATO, we've then got the airspace control order, and all these things are relatively dynamic. There's process-driven, but they're relatively, and I want to come back to that in a minute about why they were there for very good reason. But just run us through the AOD, because I always found this fascinating, that the commander was required to set out his intent, whether it was his main effort, whatever it was, for the period of that ATO cycle. Right, and it's pretty succinct, right? I mean, there's the difficulty in writing for clarity and brevity and accuracy versus those that can gabble on for hours because they've got everyone in front of them. This has to be communicated to bases far and wide, and it requires some discipline to write.
Yes.
Correct?
To me, the Air Operations Directive is the most important document, and it is the thing that allows mission command to happen, because it's not the guy in the cockpit that is making that call. Generally, mission command in the air component is where things don't go right or something new pops up or there's a different target. It's the people in things like that ABCCC or the people in the Air Operations Centre operations floor who will rearrange that and do that. That's where the mission command happens. They'll do that with the Air Operations Directive in one hand. And they'll be looking at this, go, okay, we've got two competing priorities here. What's the intent? We'll go for that one.
And that makes perfect sense. But it feels very different from mission commanders executed in the land component, whereas it's not a headquarters that executes mission command. The aspiration is that it's the chap on the front. It's the chap, in the combined arms battle group that's able to do it and push through with his 3 tanks and make the difference that changes the front line. This is about still quite a centralised function that happens in the KOC or some command centre somewhere, right?
It is, but I contend there's often a discussion about mission command saying it's pushing it down to the lowest level possible. And in the land environment, that's absolutely right, because the guy making the decision is in the situation. He can see what's around him. He can smell what's around him. He understands what's in the environment. Now, if you think about the air environment, the person in the cockpit is not always that person. And I'll give you an example. If you were thinking about Opadana, which is the counter-terrorist response to potentially hijacked airliners, if you're a pilot in a typhoon and you pull up next to an airliner and you can't really see what's going on in the cockpit, there's not really very much for you to go on. However, if you were talking to the Air Operations Centre, who's got links into the police and can find out what the passenger manifest is and can talk to the airline and see what's coming off the telemetry in the aircraft and all those other things, and can be talking to an engagement authority and can think about the consequences of what's going on, actually, who's in the best position to make that call?
Yeah, you don't want the pilot doing it.
So to me, mission command is not necessarily about having the person lowest down the chain making the call. It's about the most informed person making the call.
And usually there was this great saying when I was operating as a fighter controller, best picture has, right? And it was the person who should take command is the one who has the fullest picture, not necessarily a radar picture, but the idea of both own intent, commander's intent, and the available information, right, to make the decision. That's where mission command has got to happen better in the air environment. I wonder if land forces or naval forces could learn something similar, although the connectivity is different. And I want to come to that for a second. Because all these processes, the AOD, the ACO, the ATO, all of those processes that allow Western air power to operate effectively, lots of that stuff comes out from the last time we had great power competition. So Cold War.
It's all Cold War stuff, yeah. It's an air-land battle. That's where the ATO...
Right, all of it is air-land battle. The drive for position, the fact that you might not have communications, a properly contested air environment. It was a period in which we didn't use the terms like superiority or supremacy as related to a state of...
we didn't have the term air supremacy at all back then.
Right.
We just talked about air superiority if we could get it.
They're relatively recent terms in delivery and reality, right? We never even considered supremacy in the air domain as feasible before 96, I'm guessing.
No, and the standard joke on the Tornado Force was that if you wanted to hit a target with 2 aircrafts worth of bombs, you'd have to send 8 because 2 wouldn't start, 3 or 4 would get shot down, and 2 of them would miss. So you'd send 8 to get 2 over the target.
Which is not a bad figure of merit, right? Either way, it's the same thing if you were sending a task group of ships to go and strike a Russian surface action group over the horizon, you would send 12 and expect 2 to come back, having achieved half the mission. That was just the price of attrition. But we did learn a load of lessons there which survived, and I'm not sure we've had exposure to the contested environments that we're talking about now, both either with Russia or with China, that we've not had enough experience to give us better lessons. I'm not sure that our experiences in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria, or Yemen, or Pakistan, wherever it was, any of those lessons we've had since the Cold War offer us a better prism or better processes by which to do C2 in the air or any other domain, right?
I mean, it may actually have done us damage, because I remember a quote by a senior army officer talking about, after Afghanistan, talking about our increased confidence in effect from the air. And I thought about that. I thought, actually, what you're saying is you're expecting to have close air support every mission. And in the Cold War, we just said close air support was what you got after we'd done all the other stuff, after we dealt with the enemy air force, after we dealt with the second echelon ground forces, after we'd done all those other things, then you can have some CAS, unless it was a platform that couldn't do anything else like the A-10. But effectively, we now look at our fast jets and think those are the things that can be dropping bombs on things 500 metres ahead of our people. And actually, that's probably not the most efficient use of air power.
Oh, it's not at all the most. I mean, it's a ridiculous use of air power, right? A mortar would be better off employed than air power. It's an incredible waste of resources. But one of the other things we've changed, well, I don't know, has it changed? There's the question. The number of drones that are operating now, which are not controlled by the pilot in the cockpit, they're controlled back, often with an ops floor of more than 20 people, up to 100 people supporting drone operations, the lawyers and the engineers and the telemetrists and the intelligence geeks and all of them supporting it. Has that idea of drones changed Air C2 again? Has it accentuated some forms of it?
I'm not sure it has changed it terribly much. So, on autonomy, if you go back to the Cold War, where you might get the ATO by teleprinter, take off and radio silence with a primary target, a secondary target, and a target of opportunity category that if you couldn't get to either of those, you'd try and strike the target of opportunity. That's pretty autonomous because you were sent off and you just did your thing. Similarly, one of the things that I find quite often people talk about drones is that they're amazed that drones can do the things that manned aircraft can do. But actually, all that means is you're using them the same way. Drones don't get really interesting until you use them a different way. So if they become expendable, or if they're doing something like staying aloft for months at a time, both of which we're seeing in different areas. And this is the interesting about the Ukrainian use of drones. And I'm not certain that we're seeing warfare changed by drones as the Ukrainians are doing, because we're seeing them do deep strike with them, but they're sending off 30 drones to make a strike, hoping that one will get through. And they're only doing it because they haven't been provided with the ability to do that by Western nations who don't want them to strike too far into Russia. So I think at the moment, drones could change things, but we're not thinking about them differently enough.
And that's drones as opposed to the autonomous piece. Or are we saying those two the same things? Because drones, I'm with you. I don't think they've changed it at all. I think a lot of the time they're the wrong platform that are being used. There are stories of losses up to 10,000 platforms a week. I mean, it's an incredible rate of attrition. Perhaps we should have expected it. In fact, the counter-drone war is more interesting in many ways than the drone part of it, the whole integrated air missile defense. We've known about this stuff for some time, but where you start to sew in proper autonomy, perhaps with some of this statistical analysis, the sort of AI that fills over the top of it, a bit of edge computing, is that something that you think could change the shape going forward, or is it going to abide by the same rules? Because, if it's in its coding, it has at its heart the AOD, the command intent, then actually it's just simply another tool, albeit airborne, for the commander to use, right?
So has that changed anything?
Right.
I don't think it necessarily has. I also think we're probably going to be fairly restricted in how we'd be able to use these capabilities. Actually, we're already fairly restricted in how we would conventionally think about one aircraft shooting down another, because short of a very large, full-scale state-on-state war, we'd probably want to get positive visual identification. We'd probably want to have some kind of communication before we let anything off. So actually, it's all very well having a very sophisticated beyond visual range capability, but if you're not set up to be able to do that, then you just have to be in the same situation as you were before, flying up next to them, seeing if they're positively visually ID'd.
And if that's the case, then do the other exceptions to the rule, or the exceptions to the rule, still work? So attack aviation, like Apaches, the rotary wing supply, naval aviation in particular, the carrier strike stuff. Are those still the sort of cases that sit slightly outside the processes that we knew were established and worked?
Well, I think that there's loads of things that you could describe as edge cases. So attack helicopters is a classic one. Carrier aviation's really interesting because if you're an aviator, you can look and go, well, it's just like any other jet. It happens to take off from a runway that's in the sea, but as soon as it gets off the carrier, it goes to the tanker, and as soon as it's off the tanker, it's like any other fighter. If you're a naval person, you're probably looking at it and say, no, actually, this can do all sorts of other things for the fleet, and it's a part of the carrier's weapons system, and we could go off as an autonomous package and do all these amazing things. And of course, both are true. But actually, does it change the price of fish for SC2? I'm not sure it does. I mean, the edge cases that are interesting are going to be things like very long-range missiles and loitering munitions and things like that, things that we don't really have the rules for. I mean, we talk about fire support coordination line, a 1940s measure that we still use. Despite the fact that you talk about all the clever stuff like kill box interdiction and coordination and ROSs with different levels in that we've had in Afghanistan that you referred to earlier, at the same time, we've still got this idea about, well, we'll draw a line on the map, and short of that, it's detailed integration with the land component. Beyond that, the air component can have at it. And that's fine. It probably was fine in the days of artillery because you shoot a few miles and it wasn't really going to affect the air-to-ground battle very much. But now, I contend that one possible definition of the fire support coordination line is the line to which the ground commander is prepared to deny themselves effective air support unless they've got a JTAC in the area.
And the JTAC being the function that can effectively integrate the two domains.
Yes, and there are obviously lots of different ways of doing that, and kill box interdiction is one, but you do need that kind of integration. But the popular Army doctrine, and certainly espoused by the US Army, is that the fire support coordination line should be set as the range of the longest range land system. Well, if that's a 200-mile missile, suddenly you've got a big band of the country. You've got to do detailed integration before you use air power without knowing why you're doing it.
That can't possibly work where you're not talking hundreds of miles, you're now talking thousands of miles with US missile systems, right, coming online with the Pacific theatre specifically in mind. So does the mythical arrival of JAD-C2 or CJAD-C2, whatever it's being called this week, the perfect situational awareness and integration that might deliver if everything goes well, because that simply then does integration between all domains across a control platform that allows everything to be seen and work seamlessly. Does that overcome the burgeoning philosophy of Air C2 as you described it?
Well, firstly, you've described the aspiration, not necessarily what's going to arrive. We already had things like this. We had Link 16, which gives us a very good battlefield picture. We have a recognised air picture. I don't think it necessarily makes it invalid about how we use air power, because you're still sharing battle space and you're still using an instrument that you can switch across vast distances quickly, and that you want to be able to concentrate and force where you need it. So I think those principles will remain.
I always slightly feel guilty about this because lots of people would say, oh, bloody Cold War warriors, they want to go back to, fighting the Cold War. But I can't help feeling that when you have a contested battle space, such that we've not experienced in the last 20, 25 years, that you have a comms denied or a comms contested environment whereby you can't guarantee your communications are getting through, certainly in the way that you have experienced it in some of the recent Western fights. You have relatively equal technological operating modules. Indeed, a lot of the technical processes between belligerents and adversaries are similar to Western ones. And having shared lots of our tactics on the internet in the 1990s and 2000s through the XStack program, there aren't a lot of secrets left for Western military forces. I find it harder and harder to buy into the idea that looking back at periods of history like the Cold War when we were in Great Power competition don't have lots to offer us. And yet, from everything that every senior military officer and political beast has been saying for the last 10 years, certainly, there should be something new on the planet that makes us change and alter, even if just for the sake of it. So if not because of what's here now, are there moves in the future that could change, not necessarily the philosophical background to Air C2, but some of the manifestations of that?
I think so. Some of the work I'm doing at the moment involving artificial intelligence and using it to plan and monitor air operations gives us opportunities to do things that humans aren't necessarily very good at. And it's been quite interesting to me when I've actually had to get down to it that when we describe the air planning process, it sounds quite technical. And the first reaction of a lot of software people or scientists when you describe how things are going, they just say, well, it's just a scheduling problem. You've got this many targets, this many jets, and this many tankers, and it's just a scheduling problem. And then when you start digging into it, you suddenly realize this whole process is actually very, very human. And it involves a lot of tacit knowledge. It involves a lot of discussion and veering and hauling and horse trading in the headquarters. And actually, having been in that environment where you are planning a air operation, and you go and see the tanker guys. So, well, where do you think you are putting your orbits? Or could you put them further to the east because we're planning this to happen, and then later on we'd like that to happen. Oh, we can't do that because the bomber guys want to go there first. And actually, there's a lot of tacit knowledge, a lot of stuff that very skilled people know, and a lot of discussions that go on that aren't recorded in that thing that makes the plan. And then you come out with this order that just tells each aircraft where to go and what to do. And it doesn't really tell you what the relations between them are. So to try and mechanize that, you suddenly realize there's this whole gulf of things that go on that we don't really properly record.
And I'm not sure AI is going to solve that. There's a lovely theory that it could. And I'm not even talking about the creativity or mapping the connections between all these people. But there is a degree of this which is about relationships. There's part of this which is about understanding of permission and cultures. And a lot of that stuff is just simply not codable.
I agree, but it doesn't mean AI won't be useful, because you've got very big, complex problems, And some of it is, at the moment, somebody very skilled, like an F-35 pilot or some tactics instructor, sitting down and fat-fingering in a whole bunch of information. Now, actually, if you can do all that with AI, it leaves them free to do something much more interesting. If you can come up with 100 plans in 10 minutes, then instead of having worked up 2 or 3 courses of action and argue within them, and actually human beings aren't that great at assessing them. So you could come up with 100 courses of action, and then the AI could use its own analysis and the criteria you've given it to whittle that down to 10. Because let's face it, 95 of them will be trash. It won't know which 5 of those 10 are trash. But then you'll get the top 10. And then, instead of spending 3 hours coming up with a course of action analysis and scoring them in a fairly arbitrary way, you've then got 10 to smash into a decent cover and really think about in the time you have. So I think there's things that AI can offer us.
And the commander still gets to make a decision at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
So, and whether that gives the commander, the air component commander, the headspace to think about it because he's now got all the information, or whether that's delegated down on the basis of his still issued AOD, which then gives you that resilience that you'd want underneath it. The philosophies match, they don't necessarily conflict with each other.
And I think we don't have to have an air task order and air operations directive, but you do have to have communication of intent, and you do have to have a set of orders to go and do stuff. One of the things about air command and control is it's a specialist skill. And what I mean by that is, if you're a platoon commander, you do command and control your platoon, and then you'll become a company commander, do command and control your company, and then you'll do battalion command or what have you. So it's in the DNA of army officers. It's quite possible that an Air Force guy could be a highly qualified tactics instructor and used to putting together really complex composite air operations, or it can be a station commander, a force commander, or even a commander group, but still have no idea where the ATO actually comes from. So to that extent, it's a specialist skill, and it has to actually be taught. So this is why the Air Force actually isn't very good at defending its corner in joint areas, and particularly at Staff College, because actually you don't have that common level of understanding like you do in the other services. And I don't really know if the Navy is sort of somewhere in between the two. I imagine it probably is. But it also means that anyone can do it. You don't necessarily have to be a single-seat fast jet pilot to be a real whiz at putting together some part of the ATO. You don't necessarily have to be an aerospace battle manager. Now, clearly it helps. Clearly there are bits of it where it's worth knowing. But actually, somebody pitching up and saying, well, I'm a fast jet pilot and I've flown loads of operations, doesn't mean they understand SC2.
So there's a specialism in command and control, and I think this is similar with the findings from the land environment. There's a specialism in command and control, which itself just requires a sort of flexibility of mindset rather than a set of experiences.
Yeah, I think you kind of need both. But I think what I'm saying is it doesn't come with the territory. That you do need to put effort into generating that. You kind of need to think of it as a capability. The US Air Force talk about their air operations centers as a weapon system. That might seem a bit strange to us, but actually a command and control in the air environment does actually deliver you capability because it allows you to unlock that flexibility the air component has. But the other side of it is in much more prosaic fashion, is that if you call it a weapon system, then actually you also get with that specialisms, you get training, you have doctrine, you have funding lines for all the sort of defence lines of development that go with it. So to that extent, command and control is a capability.
I guess I'm not disputing that. I think the difference for me is how you get the right people for that functional ability, right? So for me, there's a mental capacity, there's a mental agility, there's a training, there's an experience part, which is not even necessarily an experience of C2, but it's experience of some part of the battle space that brings a element with it. There's an experience with technology and understanding of what that can bring. There's an understanding of the process, a bit about history. I mean, when you start to look at it, there's a sort of pretty multifaceted person that goes in there, but lots of it is about the individual rather than a set of functions that you give them.
Yes, I suppose it is. And there's a certain amount of training and stuff that goes with that. What you get, though, at the end, when you produce these people, is they're actually quite a useful resource. One of the questions is how do you buy influence in a coalition? And certainly in the Libya operations, there aren't that many people, aren't that many countries that do this Air C2 thing properly and quite well. And certainly in NATO, it's Britain, France, Germany to a degree. And you found that actually in the Libya operations, when the various nations were all saying, well, what am I bringing to this party? Denmark would say, well, they're the country that dropped the most bombs, and they dropped the 2,000-pound bombs, the big ones. That brought a lot to the party. The Brits had a lot of people in the Air Operations Centre and in the planning and on the ops floor, as did the French, because the French can do a lot of that. So it's quite an interesting non-Five Eyes-led British, France, US operation to look at. But it bought us a seat at the top table because we had the people to give it to. So when people say, oh, well, you've never deployed the JFAC, well, we kind of have, but we certainly deployed a lot of the JFAC's people. We're able to put, on a fairly permanent basis, people into American KOCs all around the world in significant jobs. Chief of Combat Operations, Deputy Chief of the Strategy Division, they're things that you often see a Brit, Canadian doing, sometimes Australians, doing in American headquarters. And it's something that we're routinely used to.
I'm guessing, and this is the argument I've had with the Army lots of times, if you change your doctrine of, well, we're really good at commanding, so we'll command and everyone else can fight, the same thought flies in the air environment as well, right? You pitch up at the KOC, you can command, but no one's going to follow you. You can command very well, but no one's going to follow you unless you've got a dog in the fight as well.
It's possible. But then what kind of a dog do you need in the fight? Because everybody's got jets. Every country in Europe had F-16s. And so, yes, all right, you might not turn up just with an air operations centre. But if you turn up with the tankers and the I-Star aircraft and the air operations centre, actually, loads of people can plug into you with F-16s.
But what any alliance would really want is some SEAD and DEAD aircraft. Right?
Yeah. Well, we've heard Justin Brogg talk about that. Yes,
but I get it. So there are niche capabilities that you really want. It's like anyone who comes to the field hospital in the land domain, like they're always welcome, open arms. Please bring us field. It was the Romanians that used to bring the shower unit. The shower unit arrived 20 land exercise and it was just like the best force contribution anyone would have. Or French ration packs, with the wine in. That was, there are elements that some nations bring to a party that operates. But it's about permissions as well, right? It's not just understanding the process, it's about permissions as well. So some of those people that come in with more flexible permissions, but political permissions, ROE permissions, release criteria, that also give it. But again, I guess using that correctly comes down to a good C2 set of people.
Yeah, but also it's personal relationships from the commander. Because actually, if you've got a nation who politically can't do very much, but really want to be included, that's actually, you've got the choice of saying, well, actually, we don't need you. Or you say, well, we can create a niche for you here and we can use you this way. And maybe you could bend the rules a bit and do this if you've got a good relationship with them.
So, you led it on to commander. So I just want to ask this. What makes a good air component commander?
That's a really good question, because one of the things that I thought about was who are the really famous air component commanders. And actually, it's quite possible that lots of people have gone off flying in operations and not known who the CFAC was. So to an extent, there's an idea that maybe a good air component commander is one that lets the staff get on with stuff and sorts out all the joint interactions with the rest of the other component commanders.
I would say one of the characteristics that makes a really good air component commander is their ability to think and express themselves. And it all comes back to the AOD, right?
Communication of intent.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But that's any commander, that's got to be their top thing, isn't it?
Right. But I'm not sure lots of people can do it well.
No.
Again, I agree with you. You might not be able to name them, but when you read intent that is well written, you get it completely, right? You get it utterly. It's like Stan McChrystal going and talking to the troops. It's like Jim Mattis doing the same thing in Iraq with his Marines. If you hear the commander, if you read the commander's intent, you've got it.
Yeah.
A long rambling email from someone or letter just doesn't do it in the same way. No. Maybe that is the hallmark of a great commander, full stop, not even just the air component.
I think it is, personally.
So that was my recording with Paul. It was a really interesting evening. It was a great conversation for me. I took two things away from it. Firstly, that Air C2, just like the other three traditional domains, Air C2 is different. It separates command and control in a very different way. And we need to acknowledge that as we seek to fuse so much of the C2 together in terms of systems. The Air C2 understanding and differentiation of command from control, and doing control in such a deliberate fashion, understanding where mission command sits, not with the most junior commander, but with the most appropriate commander, is a lesson perhaps we should take away and think about its transferability to the other two domains. The second big lesson I took was something I probably need to ponder a little bit more, and it was about the quiet commander, the strategist, what you really want from a good commander. What are those underlying characteristics? And there's something that Paul said to me about the quiet commander, someone who just provided consistency, normalcy, no knee-jerk reactions that enabled mission command to happen without constant worry that they weren't up to date or that junior commanders might suddenly get a storm coming from the higher headquarters because the intent had changed and they were expected to understand what that was. This idea that we need to place more emphasis on ABCs, the accuracy, brevity and clarity of commander's intent, to manage to distill that into a short paragraph that goes out to subordinate commands is actually really important. I need to do some more thinking on that, and actually we probably need to find someone who can give us some more on that and allow us to dig into that topic, because I think it's one that equally is of importance, where militaries are often, good commanders in the military are often defined and fictionalized as the loud, aggressive, in-your-face, maverick commander who's a little bit chaotic, perhaps, in some of his thinking. And perhaps that's not the truth for every operation. Something to think about more. I look forward to finding someone and recording on that, because I think that's going to be quite a good show. Listen, the show is sponsored by Systematic.
Systematic is the world leader in C4 ISR software, in use by more than 50 nations across the globe, and is a trusted provider of command and control systems.
We hope you enjoyed the show, as well as telling your friends and colleagues about it. Please do subscribe, leave us a review on any of your usual podcast streaming platforms. This really helps us to reach new audiences and spread the word. The episode is produced by AureliusThinking.com as a show for the Waiver Room, the home of intellectual curiosity and challenging thinking for military professionals everywhere. Thanks for listening.